And one of the things in my article that I mentioned was about workmates because there are a number of people who figure, well, I'll just get together with my workmates like I did before, only I don't have the stress of the job anymore. Not realizing that those were the things that binds the friendship. You're not in the trenches anymore. So you don't really necessarily relate to the same scenarios anymore. So yeah, it's fine to get together with a workmate from time to time, but it's probably not going to be often anymore. So as you say, yes, you're going to have to sort of evolve and find other friendships through volunteering, through shared activities. But that can be difficult for people too. It's just if you aren't really sure how to proceed with that, which is why it's important to have some sort of a plan before you even retire. If there's a hobby, for example, that you've always been passionate about and wanted to get off the ground rather than waiting for retirement, not a bad idea to start right before to make sure, in fact, that this is something that is going to keep you going for the 8 hours a day, if you will. Because maybe it's not your passion. Maybe you're like, yeah, it's not something that's going to sustain, right? But if you start it before, maybe you start a network at the same time, get to know people, and at least you have something to retire to.
Welcome back to The Real Retirement Show. My name is Yasmin, here with my co-host Kathleen. Whether you're retired or thinking about retirement, we delve into the multifaceted world of retirement beyond the finances. This isn't your typical retirement discussion. It's a vibrant journey into what retirement truly means in today's world. We bring you real stories from real retirees and experts discussing real challenges, surprises, joys, heartaches, and the myriad of emotions that come with retirement. From addressing family dynamics to mental and physical health to finding purpose, we tackle the issues that truly matter to retirees and those thinking about retirement. Today, we have a special guest. Our special guest is Deanne Gage, and Deanne is a reporter for the Globe Advisor at Globe and Mail. She has specialized in personal finance issues for more than 2 decades. Her articles have also appeared in the Toronto Star, Morningstar.ca, Chatelaine, is that right, Deanne?
Shadowing.
Yeah, Chatelaine.
Morning Sense, and Today's Parent Forum, and Advisor's Edge. So we're delighted to have you. Welcome, Deanne. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Deanne, we would love for you to share a little bit about your personal career journey and what's led to where you are today.
Sure. Thanks again for having me. I have been reporting on personal finance for the past 2 decades. When I started covering the industry, I was pretty young at that time. And frankly, the advisors were younger. The clients that they were serving were very much in the accumulation phase of their saving, meaning they were saving up for retirement. So a lot of the stories that I reported on at that time were about ways to make sure you have enough money to save for retirement. Now, 2 decades later, what I'm finding is people have enough money for their retirement, but they're not really sure of what retirement looks like.
That's such a big topic these days, where so many of us are taking the time working with advisors to prepare that financial security piece, but oftentimes we do overlook the life transitions that happen. And I remember, Deanne, in a recent conversation we had, that you're working on a special project right now where you're exploring what causes people to retire early. Could you share a little bit about that project that you're working on and what sort of insights you've discovered so far?
Sure. So back to even 20 years ago when I first started covering retirement trends, at that time, there was a lot of ads like Freedom 55, older couples on the yacht, or going to exotic. 2 decades later, now, present day, a lot of people are retiring and a lot of people are maintaining that lifestyle, but there's a fair number of people who are not, who have been forced to retire early due to life curveballs that have happened. By life curveballs, perhaps there was a divorce, which cut into their nest egg. Perhaps there were some healthcare challenges, either with themselves or their spouse, or even a child. perhaps there was a job loss of their adult child and they were called to help with raising their grandchildren. These are some of the issues that can come up. And people are glad, obviously, to deal with these life curveballs as they come up. But at the same time, it's not the retirement that they envisioned. Oh, and another big one is caring for aging parents. And a lot of people decide to retire early and they think, okay, I'm going to spend some time caring for my aging parents, but I'll still have some time to do things on my bucket list. But the aging parents' care is taking a lot more than they would have anticipated when they made the decision to retire early.
Dan, some of what we're talking about are the realities of what the real retirement journey is compared to what they thought. And what are the major differences when you have conversations with people, when you're interviewing them? If you could just share with us a couple of stories and what those might be.
Sure, let's take divorce as an example. Perhaps a couple's been married a really long time and both spouses, or maybe one spouse, thinks that they're working towards the same page as the other spouse. They assume they're going to retire together. They have the same vision for travel or what have you. But maybe the other spouse feels the marriage has run its course, has a different vision completely. I hear clients talking about being blindsided by the spouse deciding to file for divorce. I don't necessarily subscribe to that theory, but it may be more that they were working towards different goals all along. And they assumed that their goals were similar, but that wasn't really the case. So they divorce and there's less money to do what they want. And suddenly maybe you can't afford to live in the city that you want, in the house that you want. You have to downsize to a condo. Perhaps you have to leave the city or a town that you've lived in your whole life completely just to be able to afford to have some semblance of a retirement.
Those seem like really impractical obstacles to overcome. And certainly it would shake your foundation if you found yourself in that position without having any communication. No one wants to be blindsided at all. So I can imagine how devastating that would be.
Mm-hmm. Another example would be, let's go back to the aging parents. What I hear quite a bit is just the vast underestimating of how much time it requires to be a caregiver to your aging parents. Perhaps down the road, they thought, I'll enroll my parents in a long-term care facility. Perhaps I'll get some help for them to offset the help that I am providing. Both of those options are very expensive. And frankly, it can be very hard, even if you can afford it, it can be very hard to find the right fit. So a lot of people grappling with that as well. Yes, retirement isn't what I thought it would be. I'm spending all my time being a caregiver. When is there time for me?
That's something that I can so relate with. I am part-time taking care of my parents who are in their 80s as well. And my sister, thank goodness, is just down the street and she is incredibly supportive. We've got doctor's appointments almost every week. And there's also an emotional toll that happens along the way as in addition to the time that impacts our experience. I know Kathleen, you've taken on that type of role as well.
Yes, Yasmin, I have. And I have to be really honest. Looking at it, my background is business. So for me, it's always bottom line. And I'm always very conscientious of expenses and projections. And we have been absolutely blessed because my mother-in-law is 96. And in the journey that she's had with a retirement home and consequential changes, the cost, as you mentioned, is escalating each and every year. And it's incredibly difficult to find a good fit as well. So those stressors, in addition to perhaps subsidizing some of these costs, can only add burdens. And quite frankly, I can see where, being very honest here, how that might accelerate the option of divorce, because those are the kind of things that come up unexpectedly. You don't necessarily plan for them. And yet those are things in life that you have to deal with. And they're responsibilities that I believe as a family you need to step into.
Now, Deanne, I remember you mentioning in one of your articles that another challenge that typically comes up in retirement is the sense of loneliness. And I was curious to learn a little bit more of why that was an important topic for you to cover. And also, what were some of the key insights that you gained as you were researching and writing that particular article?
Yes, definitely a very key issue in retirement. It tends to come about when you don't have a plan for what you want to do in the next chapter of your life. There's a number of people who look forward to retiring. They've worked their whole life. Frankly, a lot of them are burnt out, and they figure when they retire, they'll figure out what the plan is once they retire. But what happens is the days become weeks, which become months and years, and there's still no plan. And meanwhile, years gone by, you've watched all the TV, maybe you've got together with friends for lunch from time to time, played the occasional game of golf or tennis or what have you, but you've discovered that the days are pretty long. You have to fill a whole day, and work used to take up a lot of your time, and you have to have a plan to how you're going to fill up those 8 to 10 hours. I found through my research that it was especially an issue for men because what advisors have found is that women tend to keep up with friendships or family. They were always the people who organized the social events in their lives. And if they had a spouse, a husband, for example, the husband would just go along with whatever his wife had planned. But what happens is, especially if the man is now divorced, now widowed, there's no one there to really fill that role anymore. And they they just have to have issues with how to plan with that. Because the other thing is that they may be very good at getting together with friends through like-minded activities. They golf, tennis, hockey, sports. But one thing that advisors found is that's only good for so long because when your body catches up with you as you get older, maybe you can't do those activities with any real frequency anymore. And because the friendships in those cases was based around a shared activity, they didn't really go deeper than that. So there's no real glue to keep things together.
I can imagine that when we're in our careers and work world, that there's this constant flow of new potential relationships that get developed. There's ways to meet new people and get introduced to different circles as well. But once we've stepped out of that particular phase, it seems unless we're proactive about getting out there and meeting new people, slowly as, like you mentioned, our bodies start to decline and we're withdrawing from some of those activities, we're finding out our circles continue to get smaller and we're not replacing or at least introducing new relationships in our lives.
And one of the things in my article that I mentioned was about workmates because there are a number of people who figure, well, I'll just get together with my workmates like I did before, only I won't have the stress of the job anymore. Not realizing that those were the things that tie the binds, like the ties that people, the bases that kept the friendship going, if you will. You're not in the trenches anymore. So you don't really necessarily relate to the same scenarios anymore. So yeah, it's fine to get together with a workmate from time to time, but it's probably not going to be often anymore. So as you say, yes, you're going to have to sort of evolve and find other friendships through volunteering, through shared activities. But that can be difficult for people too. It's just if you aren't really sure how to proceed with that, which is why it's important to have some sort of a plan when before you even retire. If there's a hobby, for example, that you've always been passionate about and wanted to get off the ground rather than waiting for retirement, not a bad idea to start right before to make sure, in fact, that this is something that is going to keep you going for the 8 hours a day, if you will. Because maybe it's not your passion. Maybe you start a network at the same time, get to know people, and at least you have something to retire to.
Deanne, one of the things you mentioned a little while ago fell into what we call and categorize, pardon me, family dynamic. When all of a sudden children return home or you're faced with the need to help with childcare, grandparents helping with grandchildren. How did you find the conversation evolved when you were doing research about that particular aspect of the retirement journey?
Yeah, it's funny. Many advisors mention that with their clients. There was a great divide between mothers and fathers, especially. Mothers wanted to financially help their adult children. They wanted to take a more active role in the grandchildren's lives. Not to say that the fathers didn't want to do that as well, but it wasn't necessarily a primary focus for the fathers. They still wanted to take that big trip and they saw that as more of a priority. Whereas if children needed the assistance, they were willing to do it, but not only to a certain extent. So that also raises a good point of another article that I did, which looked at couples and their differing views of retirement and what they like, what it looks like. And that's one of the examples of that.
What were some of the differences that you discovered as it relates to their visions for retirement?
So, okay, grandchildren would be one. The biggest one would be when to retire. So you may have a situation where one spouse wants to retire yesterday. Another spouse perhaps is really still going strong in their career and is not ready. So the one spouse retires, the other still keeps working. What's that dynamic look like at home? Who's responsible for household chores during that time? Issues like that. Even if both of them do retire, perhaps one of the spouses was the one that was responsible for household management for the duration of their marriage. So both spouses decide to retire. There's still that household management piece that has to take place. Is it much of a retirement for the person who always managed that if they're still doing it all? These are real issues that come up with people, and they're not discussed, or they don't tend to be discussed until you're in it. And if they're not resolved, then it could lead to divorce.
Well, Yasmin, do you recall when we did a focus group, this exact circumstance was highlighted by one of the attendees and brought every point that you've just made to light at that time. And it's absolutely consistent with what their feeling was precisely.
Yeah. When we're not having these conversations, there's these expectations in each partner's mind that can be conflicting, as you shared there, Deanna. And that causes conflict. And a lot of times, I would imagine sometimes we're not equipped with how to have those types of conversations with each other.
I would concur with that. We're not equipped with it at all. And I think for so long, consciously or not, we've been bombarded with those ads of that couple on the yacht, on the dock, in that fancy locale. And we thought subconsciously, this is what life will be like. But the reality has been a lot of life curveballs and frankly, a lot of internal conflict among spouses trying to make things work in their next chapter with each other.
It's interesting. I had a conversation at a social setting last evening, and exactly this happened as well. Because one partner was able to retire, and yet the other partner said, whoa, I'm not even close to wanting to retire. So there was a real, I don't want to say push-pull, but it was a stumbling block that my question to them was, how do you see a resolution happening? And they just didn't want to talk about it. They were just going to let it try and work itself out. Have you ever found with your research that was a successful outcome?
There does come to be a breaking point at some point because if issues are left to fester, may not be right away, might be a year or 5 years down the road, but I feel like they would need to have a discussion with somebody, whether it's not their advisor or counselor, to help them work through the issue. But I feel like it's only now where people are starting to talk more about these types of issues. Like loneliness was something that I feel it's not a new issue, but it's being talked about a lot more in general. It's been called the silent killer, for example. It's not just about retirement. It's about as you get older in general. Just people are more isolated, and that has a direct impact on their health.
Mhm.
And also it has to do with demographics. For example, there are more one person households of, than any other kind of household in Canada right now. That's at around 29-30% of one people living alone.
Yeah.
So
There's
those networks, that sense of community become very important.
yeah. There's been so much scientific research that where it has even articulated that loneliness is becoming a prevalent epidemic that we're facing in society. And sometimes it's not just about the number of people that we have around us, but I've even experienced situations where you're surrounded by people, but you still feel lonely because there's a lack of intimacy or a deeper connection and understanding of perhaps what you're going through. Is that something that you've discovered as well, Tian?
Absolutely. Finding that deeper connection with somebody, especially later in life, it's very difficult. Both parties have to be willing to put the work in, and not everyone is. And so that definitely can lead to that feeling of isolation.
I'm curious, Deanne. You've spoken with a lot of financial advisors and professionals, and w- what role do you see that advisors can play in order to support their clients in this transition or this journey beyond the financial or the planning piece of their relationship?
Advisors have started asking more deeper questions of their clients. In the past, I feel it was more about getting them to the retirement phase in terms of the actual having the money in place. Now that the money is in place, there's a lot more questions such as how do you plan on spending your days in retirement? And if they don't have an answer, trying to drill down. There are also more advisors that are arming their directory with counselors, life coaches, relationship coaches, in addition to the more tried and true accountants, lawyers, just to make sure that they have people that their clients can talk to about these issues. I really feel that there's a shift and they understand the importance of these issues. Because if you don't address them, your retirement is going to be miserable. And I think everyone wants to have something that is successful. And yes, you may have to deal with life curveballs in your retirement, but if you can have at least part of it be enjoyable, seeing your friends, going on the occasional trip, pursuing that hobby you've always wanted to do, then that's a good thing.
Yeah.
To the point of having, I guess, a team behind a financial advisor or money manager, and you suggested that they are looking now for transition coaches or other helpers that might work with their clients. Do you find it to be an easy process for them to find these solution providers or these coaches, or what is the temperament in that space right now?
It's not always easy, but what ends up happening is it ends up being a bit of a word of mouth type of situation. So there may be clients who have worked through issues such as about isolation, conflict in the marriage, and the advisor may ask that person for a referral of the professionals who helped them, just somebody to add on the directory. There's a lot of that kind of thing that may take place as well. They may know of them as well, but it's a bit of give and take, to be honest.
Mm. Tian, Kathleen and I have spoken with a number of different advisors, and especially in our field of war care. And it's been an interesting observation that the there is a curiosity, and there for a select number of advisors, there's adoption around this more holistic, non-financial relationship with their clients. But what we've observed is that it's still an emerging market. There's still a lot of folks that are still hesitant to have these types of conversations with their clients. And I'm curious from your conversations, what are some things that hold advisors back from crossing that threshold and having that deeper life planning conversation with their clients?
I think that if you're an advisor who mainly earns your income by selling products, then you're probably going to be focused on the assets directly, accumulating, and maybe strategies for withdrawing the money in retirement. However, if you're a comprehensive financial planner, perhaps you're paid by the hour or you're paid a percentage of the assets. There's room in there for like advice has nothing to do with money at all. It may have to do with life coaching, may have to do with taxes. It may have to that's part of the reason why people pay for professional advice. It's not just about gathering the assets and
Mhm.
ensuring you have enough. It's about I'm lonely and I have no idea what I want to do in retirement. Is there somebody I can talk to about this? Do you have any suggestions for me of seniors groups that I could meet with? You could talk to your advisor about that and they would be getting paid by the hour or what have you, but they would be giving you invaluable advice, as invaluable as if they were recommending a particular product. It's still advice.
I imagine that there's an opportunity to realign some of the reward and incentive structures for organizations to reinforce or at least incentivize these types of conversations. And I would also imagine that in doing so, it impacts businesses in a positive way, whether it be deeper connections, more referral, retention, and other ways that actually also affects the bottom line of the business.
I think high-end advisors are definitely having these conversations because they get it. They want to understand their whole client. They understand an engaged client is a good thing. An engaged client is going to be a happy client. A happy client is going to sing your praises as an advisor. They are going to refer you to other people and say, look what an advisor did for me.
Hmm.
And it may have nothing to do with money. It may have to do with a referral to a life coach that changed that person's life and made them have a more successful retirement.
Well, I have a quick question then about that, just exactly this situation. If I was a client, what questions would I ask if I were interviewing advisors? What questions might I pose to ensure that I found someone that would fulfill those needs?
That's a good question. I think I would probably want to know most clients, they actually are very concerned about the money piece. So if beyond that, I think they would probably ask questions about how do you ensure, like, what looks like a successful retirement to you? I might ask a question, something like that, of the advisor. And if the advisor is saying, oh, having $10 million, yacht, the dock, and that's all they talk about, maybe that's a no. But if the person talks about level of engagement, giving back to the community, just different things, then maybe that would be trigger something in somebody thinking, maybe this person can help me to formulate what I hope will be a successful retirement for me.
That's an excellent question. That really is. Thank you
Mm.
for sharing that with us and for thinking so clearly on the spot.
We've covered so much today in just our short conversation, Deanna. I know that we've touched on the experience of isolation and loneliness that retirees unexpectedly have, as well as the dynamics of couples and the differences that they might have for their vision of retirement, as well as those that may be finding themselves retiring unexpectedly as well. Is there anything else that from your research and your conversations that you feel is important to share that is the reality of what retirement might be for some people?
I would hope that advisors would emphasize that the ideal retirement looks different depending on the individual. Doesn't have to be loud and flashy. A great retirement can be getting together with your group of friends every morning for coffee. doing some volunteer work, coming home and having lunch with your spouse, spending time getting through that mystery series of novels that you've been trying to get through, but never had the time to do. It doesn't have to be a big flashy thing. I would hope the right advisor would really drill down with the client and determine what would work best for them.
Mm.
I
Um,
love that answer. That is
mhm.
the perfect tie a bow on what should happen. And I love that you mentioned that it doesn't have to be flashy. It doesn't have to be loud. I think that's one of the things that many people expect of others. What are you going to do now that you're retired? Where are you going to go? And you almost feel as though you have to decide quickly to answer that question, or they're going to think less of you. But I love the fact I'm going to read that book. I'm going to spend some time on myself. And that's really important in life, especially at this point.
Let's tell one more story, and this is a personal one. My father was retired for 22 years. I saw him retire when I was a teenager. And this is well before I would have even been covering the issue or anything, but my parents were newly divorced at that time. I think he certainly had expectations for what retirement looked like with my mother and him were still together, but they weren't. So it was just him. I think he struggled a bit with deciding what to do first, just hanging around the house a lot, not doing much of anything. He was a mechanic and loved fixing things, just TVs, VCRs at the time, microwaves, different things like that. Anyway, in the end, after 2 years of kind of not doing much of anything, he ended up taking a course in that area, small engines or something like that. And then he didn't want to still work on cars anymore, even though that's what he always did, because in the wintertime, like working on cars, it can be cold in a garage and it can be hard on your body, but he still liked fixing things. And the long and the short of it is he ended up going to work or volunteer his time part-time at a fix-it shop, fixing people's microwaves, TVs and stuff like that. And that gave him great pleasure to give back and to help out, to help mentor the younger people fixing the things because he understood more of the older technology than they did. And it gave him a place, to be honest, for a couple days a week. So he's utilizing his skills, helping to mentor, and gave him something to do. And that helped to springboard other things that he wanted to do in retirement. So sometimes it's just figuring out what that one little thing is that just to help fill your days.
Mm.
That ticked all the boxes for him and many of them that we discuss with our group. And thank you so much for that story, because that really sums up exactly what we're hoping everyone can do, is find a plan and initiate beginning of that plan. And you never know where it'll take you. And as you said, it took him to areas, whether it be meeting new friends or initiating new conversations and mentorship, which is delightful. That's a wonderful thing that he was able to plan and execute.
Yeah. What an inspiring story, Deanne. Thank you for sharing that. And I think one of the challenges that many people may face is trying to figure it out. And part of the opportunity, perhaps, for the advisor is to, in addition to playing the role of managing and supporting the financial piece, is perhaps expanding into a role of maybe an agent of discovery, where they're acting as a catalyst for guiding that discovery process, because each person's retirement journey is different. And if they can support in exploring possibilities, perhaps that's an impact that they could make in addition to the financial relationship.
For sure. I think it's very similar. Like my older daughter right now is going into grade 11. She has no idea what she wants to do with her life. So it's similar to figuring out what you want to do in retirement, right? What does she want to do? What skill set is she good? Like, what are her skills that she's strong with? What are her skills that she needs improvement? What are the things that she's always wanted to do? What are the things that are absolute no's? It's a similar kind of process. So maybe what it is, just revisiting these things every few decades or so, and that will help to springboard what we want to do and what we may want to do in retirement. Like with my father, he always liked fixing things. He just didn't want to do messing with the cars anymore. He wanted to work in it didn't matter if it was summer or winter, a nice shop that was quiet and air conditioned or heated, like a garage, which you get the gamut, right?
Well, Deanne, it has been such a pleasure, and thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom. How can people read more of your work and find out more about you and the projects that you're working on?
I am on LinkedIn. Um, I'm a reporter for Globe Advisor, which is Globe Advisor. That's ADBISOR.com. My articles are all in there.
Great. We'll include those in the show notes then as well. Kathleen, any final thoughts as we
Wow.
wrap?
Yasmin, I'm always so happy when we meet and have a discussion and find such strong alignment with the programs that we've developed, the assessments that we have available as tools, and to deal with all of what we've gone through for the last few years, and to have someone align so closely with the theories and the outcomes, what the positive outcomes can be, is always a real pleasure. And Deanna, I'm so glad we met. And I'm so glad that you've agreed to meet again with us today and share your experience and all of your expertise with our listening audience. I'm sure they're going to be happy to listen along. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathleen and Yasmin, for having me. I had a great time.
Thank you for taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it valuable, please subscribe, follow, and leave a comment or review on your favorite platform. If you have friends, clients, or loved ones who are retired or thinking about retirement, we invite you to share this show with them. Check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned in this episode at realretirementshow.com. Remember, retirement is a joyful journey we get to experience together. Join us next week for another Real Retirement Conversation.